Imagine a world where a young girl, full of life and dreams, was forced to make the ultimate sacrifice for a horrific crime, refusing to marry her own father. Her life, once full of hope, was cut short, leaving behind a haunting tale of betrayal, injustice, and a brutal punishment that still shocks people today. This is the story of a girl who became a victim of a monstrous act that defied all human decency, a tale that echoes through the centuries. This story takes us to a small, isolated village in the heart of medieval Europe, where the line between right and wrong was often blurred by ancient customs, power struggles, and the twisted desires of those in positions of authority. In this society, women were seen as little more than property, their voices silenced by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Among these injustices, one tale stands out, a tale so dark and unimaginable that it has been passed down through generations. Her name was Eleanor, a young girl from a noble family, destined for a life of comfort and respect. But fate had a different plan. Her father, Lord Frederick, a man of power and influence, began to develop feelings for her that were not only forbidden but utterly sickening. The forbidden desire. As Eleanor blossomed into womanhood, her beauty and grace became the envy of many. But it was her father's desire for her that set the tragic course of events in motion. Lord Frederick, a man of significant standing, began to view his own daughter as a prize, someone to be claimed and controlled. His obsession grew, and the line between fatherly love and incestuous desire began to fade. He proposed a marriage proposal that shook Eleanor to her core. "Marry me, my daughter, and become my wife," he demanded. This proposal wasn't a formality, but a twisted order. He made it clear that refusal was not an option. Eleanor, terrified and disgusted, knew that accepting would destroy her soul and defy everything that was sacred. The refusal. But Eleanor was no ordinary girl. She had been taught that honor, integrity, and love were the true foundations of life. To marry her own father, the very man who had raised and cared for her, was something she could never bring herself to accept. So, with trembling hands but a heart full of courage, she refused. Her defiance was met with fury. Lord Frederick's eyes, once warm with parental affection, now burned with rage. The villagers whispered about the situation, but no one dared to intervene. The power he held over them was absolute. His anger intensified, and the very idea of being disobeyed by his daughter became a matter of honor for him. The dark decision. Instead of accepting her refusal, Lord Frederick decided that Eleanor's disobedience could not go unpunished. His mind, clouded by obsession and a sense of entitlement, concocted a horrific plan to teach his daughter a lesson she would never forget. But it wasn't enough to simply punish her. He wanted to make an example of her, a display of power and control that would solidify his authority over the people. In a moment of sickening clarity, he decided that the only way to rid himself of Eleanor as Defiance was to eliminate her completely. The execution. The village square, once a place for community gatherings, became the stage for an unimaginable act of brutality. Lord Frederick ordered his daughter to be brought before him, publicly, in front of the townsfolk. The air was thick with tension as the townspeople gathered, knowing something terrible was about to unfold. Eleanor was bound, her hands tied behind her back, her face pale with fear, but still full of defiance. Lord Frederick, standing tall in his regal attire, ordered the executioner to carry out the sentence. The crowd stood in stunned silence as the blade was raised. In one swift, tragic moment, Eleanor's life was taken, her head severed from her body in the name of honor and obedience. The aftermath. The execution did not bring peace to the village. Instead, it cast a dark shadow over the land, a stain on the soul of the community that could never be washed away. Lord Frederick, having committed the unthinkable, became a pariah in the eyes of the people. His power, once unquestionable, began to wane. The villagers, who had stood in silence, now found their courage, speaking of Eleanor's innocence and the madness of her father's actions. As for Eleanor, she became a symbol of resistance and tragedy, her story passed down through generations, a reminder of the horrors that can arise when power and obsession collide. Eleanor's story is one of profound injustice, a young girl caught in the web of a sickening desire she had no control over. Her refusal to comply with her father's monstrous demand cost her everything, her life, her dignity, and her place in history. But the legacy of her courage lives on as her tale continues to echo through the ages. But this is only part of the story. There's more to this dark chapter that we must explore. After the brutal execution of Eleanor, the once feared and respected Lord Frederick was no longer the powerful figure he had once been. The event sent shockwaves through the village, and soon the atmosphere that had once been filled with silence and fear began to shift. The dark and tragic tale of Eleanor's refusal to marry her father became a catalyst for change, and it wasn't long before the townspeople started to view Lord Frederick in a very different light. In the wake of Eleanor's death, many of the villagers began to speak out, albeit in hushed tones. They could no longer ignore the brutality of the act. Eleanor, who had always been a quiet and humble figure, became the symbol of resistance against tyranny and corruption. She had rejected a fate forced upon her, even when it meant facing death. Her courage began to shine through the tragedy, and people who had once feared Lord Frederick now looked at him with contempt. For the first time, whispers of rebellion surfaced. People began to question the very foundation of the society that had allowed such an atrocity to take place. How could a father do such a thing to his own daughter? This was a question that gnawed at the people's conscience. The legacy of Eleanor's defiance was powerful enough to ignite a quiet revolution among the common folk. They began to reflect on the injustice of the monarchy and the grip that those in power had over their lives. Lord Frederick's downfall. Though Lord Frederick had executed Eleanor in the name of maintaining control and instilling fear, the consequences of his actions were far more severe than he had anticipated. He thought the gruesome display of power would subdue any dissent, but instead, it triggered the opposite effect. The villagers who had once been obedient to him now whispered in fear and anger, quietly turning against him. Within weeks, stories of his brutal actions spread beyond the village. It wasn't too long before people in neighboring towns and cities began to hear the tale of the man who had beheaded his own daughter. A scandal of this magnitude was hard to ignore, and soon, Eleanor's story became a symbol of cruelty that crossed the line, even by the harshest standards of that era. The pressure on Lord Frederick mounted. The whispers of rebellion soon turned into actions as people refused to support him. His once loyal allies distanced themselves from him, and even the royal court began to question his ability to rule. The king, who had once supported Lord Frederick, now found himself pressured to take action against him. The story of Eleanor's tragic fate had reached the highest levels of the kingdom, and the truth of Lord Frederick's actions could no longer be concealed. The guilt that haunted Lord Frederick. Though Lord Frederick managed to hold on to his title for a while longer, his guilt began to haunt him at night. He would often find himself restless, unable to sleep as the image of Eleanor's beheaded body haunted his mind. It was said that he began to speak of her, almost as if he could still hear her voice in the silence of his chambers. The father who had once held power over his daughter was now being driven mad by the very power he had once taken for granted. Eleanor's refusal to comply with his demand had been her final act of defiance, and in her death, she left behind a legacy that would never be erased. Lord Frederick's inability to move past his own actions led to his eventual fall from grace. Many who had once feared him now took solace in his unraveling, witnessing the consequences of his monstrous crime. No matter how much he tried to suppress it, the guilt he carried became his prison. The legacy of Eleanor's defiance. Eleanor's story would live on far beyond her tragic end. It began to circulate across the land, becoming a tale passed down through generations. Her courage in the face of unspeakable odds, her refusal to submit to her father's twisted desires transformed her into a symbol of hope and strength for many. The story of her death served as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one could stand for what was right. In the years that followed, people began to challenge the old systems of power that had allowed such atrocities to happen. Eleanor's bravery was often invoked in the speeches of those who sought justice, and her refusal to marry her father became a metaphor for breaking free from the chains of oppression. As time went on, the story of Eleanor was woven into the fabric of the village's history, evolving into a legend that inspired others to fight for their rights and question the unjust systems that governed their lives. In a sense, Eleanor had achieved the very thing her father had hoped to destroy. She had left a lasting legacy of resistance that could not be erased. The ultimate tragedy. Though Lord Frederick's power faded and he eventually died in isolation, Eleanor's death marked the beginning of a new era for the village. The trauma of her brutal end would never be forgotten, but her spirit lived on in the hearts of those who remembered her courage. Her story was one of injustice, but also of incredible strength in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a story that reminded future generations of the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. Eleanor's story is not just one of tragic loss, but one of profound courage and the fight against a system of power that sought to break her spirit. Her refusal to marry her own father cost her everything, but in the end, it was the greatest act of resistance that history would ever know. Her legacy is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of defiance in the face of unimaginable darkness.